I've been a long-haul trucker for most of my adult life. There's something about the open road that used to calm me. The long stretches of highway, the soft hum of the tires on asphalt, and the simple rhythm of driving for hours with nothing but the sound of the engine and the faint static of the CB radio. I liked being alone, watching the country pass by mile after mile. But one night, a few years back, I learned that the road isn't as quiet or as safe as it looks when the sun goes down. It was a late autumn night. I had picked up a load of lumber from a small mill in northern Montana and was heading south toward Idaho. The route cut through long stretches of back highways, with not much traffic and even fewer towns. It was one of those hauls that I usually liked. Just me, the truck, and the road. But that night something felt different from the start. The air was cold and dry, the kind of air that makes your breath look like smoke inside the cab if you don't keep the heater running. I left the mill around 8 p.m., and by the time I hit the two-lane highway, it was pitch dark. There were no streetlights out there, just my headlights cutting a path through the dark, and every now and then the faint reflection of animal eyes on the side of the road. About an hour into the drive, I noticed something odd. There was a faint flicker of light far behind me, like a pair of headlights, but they kept appearing and disappearing. Sometimes they'd be there a good half-mile back, and then they'd vanish for several minutes before showing up again. At first, I thought it was just another driver far behind me, maybe turning through bends that made their lights dip out of view. But the road was straight for a long stretch, and even after miles, the same pattern kept happening on, off, on again. I checked my mirrors often, watching the lights fade and reappear. They seemed to be gaining on me slowly. I wasn't speeding, just keeping steady at about 65, but the other vehicle seemed determined to catch up. The longer I watched those lights, the more uneasy I felt. I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. I'd driven enough miles to know how cars and trucks behave at night. You can tell a lot from headlights, the distance, the type of vehicle, how fast they're moving. But these lights didn't move naturally. They didn't bounce the way headlights normally do on rough highway. They almost looked too steady when they were on, and when they disappeared, it wasn't gradual, like a dip behind a hill. It was instant, like someone flipping a switch. After another 20 minutes, I decided to pull over at a wide shoulder to check my load straps and give the guy behind me a chance to pass. I turned on my hazards and rolled to a stop. The highway around me was silent. I stepped out of the cab, the cold biting through my jacket, and listened. The air was still. I looked back down the road, waiting to see the lights again, but there was nothing. No glow, no sound of an engine, just empty darkness stretching for miles. I stood there for a while, staring down the highway. The only sound was the ticking of my cooling engine. I checked the straps on the lumber, tight as ever, then walked around the trailer, shining my flashlight along the tires and undercarriage. Everything looked fine. When I climbed back into the cab and started rolling again, I told myself it was nothing. Probably some driver pulling over behind me, maybe turning off somewhere I couldn't see. I tried to shake the feeling and focus on the road. For the next hour, nothing unusual happened. The road curved through low hills, and the forest thickened on both sides. The highway got narrower, and my high beams lit up tall pine trunks that seemed to close in the farther I went. Then, as I came around a bend, I caught a glimpse of something in the shoulder, what looked like a piece of clothing. I slowed a little, and as my lights passed over it, I saw it was a jacket. It was just lying there, half buried in dirt, the kind of thing that made you wonder how it got there. A mile or so later, I saw something else. A boot, sitting upright in the grass. Then, a few miles after that, a torn piece of tarp flapping from a tree branch. It felt strange seeing those things spaced out like that, like something or someone had been dropping them one at a time. I started feeling the same unease again, that prickling at the back of my neck that every trucker gets when something feels wrong but you can't explain why. I decided to stop at the next rest area I came across, but it was another hour before I reached one. By then, it was close to midnight. The rest stop was small, just a loop with 2 vending machines, a bathroom building, and 3 dim streetlights that barely worked. One of the lights was flickering constantly, casting shadows that made everything look like it was moving. There was only one other truck parked there, an old white box truck with no markings. The cab lights were off, and there was no sign of anyone inside. I parked a few spaces away, shut off the engine, and sat for a minute listening to the ticking metal and the faint wind outside. When I stepped out, the night was colder. I could see my breath hanging in the air. The box truck didn't make a sound. I walked toward the vending machines, got a coffee, and stood there under the buzzing light, drinking it slowly. The place felt deserted, like time had stopped there. Then I noticed footprints in the frost-covered gravel. They were fresh, too fresh. They led from the box truck toward the small patch of trees behind the rest stop. And there were a lot of them, like someone had been pacing or circling around. I stared at those footprints for a long time, my coffee going cold in my hand. I didn't know why, but they made my stomach tighten. There was something about the way they overlapped that didn't feel right. It looked like whoever made them had been moving back and forth for a while. I decided I'd had enough rest. I tossed the cup, climbed back in the cab, and locked the doors. I started the engine, headlights cutting through the lot. The box truck stayed dark. As I pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't help glancing in my mirrors. About 5 miles down the road, I saw headlights again. 2 small dots in the distance, coming from the same direction as the rest stop. My stomach sank. They looked like the same lights from earlier, flickering in and out of view, closing in slowly. This time I didn't stop. I kept driving for hours, watching the mirror. The lights never got close enough for me to make out the vehicle, but they never disappeared for long either. It felt like whoever it was, they were keeping just enough distance to stay hidden. Around 3 in the morning, I hit a section of road that cut through open farmland. No trees, no turns, just flat, empty land stretching forever. That's when I finally got a clear look. The vehicle behind me wasn't a car. It was that same white box truck. I recognized the way its headlights were set slightly uneven. It stayed about a quarter mile behind me, never speeding up, never slowing down, just holding that distance. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the mirror. Every few minutes, I thought about pulling over to confront whoever it was, but something deep in my gut told me not to. I kept driving until dawn. The first bit of sunlight broke through the clouds, and that's when I noticed something new. Dark stains running down the side of my trailer. I pulled over at a small gas station outside a town called Salmon and climbed out to look. The stains were thick and brownish red, smeared along the metal edge near the rear. My first thought was hydraulic fluid or rust from the mill, but when I looked closer, it didn't look like that. It looked like dried blood. I walked around to the back, and what I saw made me stop cold. Wedged between the lower beam and the tarp tie down was a torn piece of fabric. A sleeve from a jacket, dirty and stiff. It looked exactly like the one I'd seen lying on the roadside earlier that night. I just stood there staring at it, the noise of passing cars sounding far away. I don't know how it got there. Maybe someone at the mill brushed against the trailer before I left, or maybe I'd driven past something on the road that got caught up somehow. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. When I looked back toward the road, the white box truck was gone. I never saw it again after that morning. I filed a report at the next way station, just to be safe. The state police checked the trailer, took a sample, and told me they'd contact me if anything came of it. I never heard back, but sometimes, late at night when I'm hauling through empty stretches of highway, I still catch myself checking the mirrors a little too often. And when I see headlights far behind me, flickering in and out, I feel that same tightness in my chest. The road can look empty, but out there it never really is. Someone's always moving through the dark, and sometimes you just don't want to know how close they've been following. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years, and in all that time, I've seen things most people wouldn't believe. I've driven through snowstorms so heavy I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. I've crossed deserts where the heat made the air shimmer like water. I've watched entire highways vanish in fog so thick it felt like I was floating through nothing. But none of that ever really scared me. The only time I truly felt fear on the road was one night in western Kansas, on a stretch of highway that most drivers try to avoid after dark. Started like any other long haul. I was hauling packaged produce from Denver to a distribution center outside St. Louis. It wasn't a heavy load, but the route took me through a lot of open country. Long, empty roads that didn't see much traffic after midnight. The dispatcher told me the weather was clear, no storms, no construction delays. Everything looked routine. I left Denver around 4 p.m., filled up in Limon, and hit the open road just as the sun started to drop behind me. The sky turned from orange to purple, and then the darkness came fast. I liked that part of the drive, the transition into night. The road quieted down, the radio faded into static, and it was just me, the engine hum, and the steady white lines sliding under my headlights. By about 10 p.m., I was deep into Kansas. The road was flat and straight for miles, nothing but fields stretching out into the dark on both sides. Every so often, I'd pass a cluster of dim lights from a farmhouse, then it would be nothing again. I hadn't seen another truck or car for almost an hour. That's when I noticed something odd in the distance. About half a mile ahead, something reflective caught my headlights. At first, I thought it was a road sign or maybe a piece of metal that had fallen from another vehicle. But as I got closer, I realized it was moving, slowly, almost drifting across the road. I eased off the throttle, expecting maybe a deer or a coyote, but it wasn't an animal. When the light hit it fully, I saw it was a shopping cart, an old, rusted one, rolling in slow circles right in the middle of the highway. It didn't make sense. There was nothing out there, no stores, no towns for miles. I pulled over to the shoulder, flipped on my hazards, and stepped out with my flashlight. The air was cold and dry, the wind strong enough to push the cart a little. I walked closer and saw it was half crushed on one side, with a bent wheel and a piece of cloth tangled in the metal. When I looked around with the flashlight, the fields stretched out forever, completely dark. No houses, no cars, no movement. Just the sound of the wind cutting across the open land. I pushed the cart off the road and climbed back in the cab, feeling uneasy for reasons I couldn't explain. After that, the road felt different. I kept driving, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. My eyes kept darting to the mirrors, expecting headlights or movement behind me, but there was nothing. The radio was nothing but static, so I turned it off. About an hour later, I came up on a small rest stop. Just 2 fuel pumps, a single old vending machine, and a small concrete building with a bathroom sign. I wasn't tired, but I needed to stretch my legs and check my straps. The lot was empty when I pulled in. The air smelled faintly like diesel and dust. I grabbed my flashlight again, walked around the trailer, checked the tires and cargo. Everything was fine. Then I noticed something strange on the back bumper. Muddy smudges, like handprints. They weren't clear enough to tell if they were fresh, but they stood out against the clean metal. I wiped one with my glove, but it didn't come off easily. It looked like dry dirt mixed with oil or grease. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe from a loading dock worker or another driver who had bumped into the trailer. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. Not even 5 miles later, I saw something else that made my stomach tighten. On the right shoulder, just barely caught in my high beams, there was a parked pickup truck. It looked old, maybe from the 90s, with one headlight smashed and the hood dented. The driver's door was open and the cab light was on. I slowed a little, watching it pass by. I expected to see someone standing outside or maybe trying to flag me down, But there was nobody, just that open door swinging in the wind. I checked my mirror, and the truck disappeared behind me into the dark. I kept going, but my hands were tighter on the wheel. I didn't like how quiet it was. The highway was long and flat, and my headlights stretched ahead like a tunnel through nothing. Every shadow on the edge of the road made me glance twice. At some point, around 2 a.m., I realized I'd been seeing something in my mirrors off and on for miles. A small flicker of light, like the reflection of a vehicle behind me, but faint, distant. It would show up for a few seconds, then vanish again. It went on like that for nearly half an hour. Then, at one point, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a shape. Not headlights this time, something lower, darker, like a figure moving along the edge of the trailer. I thought maybe I was just seeing things. My eyes were tired, and the endless black around me played tricks sometimes. But I couldn't shake the image. I eased off the gas, leaned forward, and watched the side mirror. The figure was gone. I pulled over again, right there on the shoulder. The engine idled softly, and I climbed out with the flashlight. The air was still and silent except for the faint ticking of metal cooling. I walked along the length of the trailer, shining the light over every inch of it. Halfway down, I saw something that froze me where I stood. There was a small smear on the side of the trailer, dark, almost black under the light. I touched it and it was sticky. It wasn't grease or oil. I knew what that texture felt like. I walked to the back, shining the light around the bumper again, and my stomach turned. There were fresh streaks leading down from the latch, wet and dark against the metal. I climbed back into the cab and just sat there for a while. I didn't know what to do. Turning around on that highway wasn't an option, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for hours. The nearest town was still 30 miles away. I decided the best thing I could do was keep driving until I found a police station or a truck stop with people around. When I finally saw lights on the horizon, it felt like a relief. A gas station with a diner and a few parked semis came into view. I pulled in fast and parked near the pumps. Under the bright lights, I walked back to check the trailer again. The streaks were still there, dried now, and on the lower edge of the door, I found something that made my knees weak. A small piece of torn fabric stuck to the hinge. It looked like part of a sleeve, dark blue with a white stripe. It hit me all at once then, how that shopping cart had been in the middle of nowhere, how the handprints had appeared later, how the figure had moved near the trailer. I started wondering if someone had been hiding on my rig the whole time. Maybe they climbed on back at that rest stop, or even earlier without me noticing. I called it in at the gas station and waited for the police to check the trailer. They opened it and I stood there watching. The cargo was still in place, untouched, but near the front corner of the trailer, they found a small sleeping bag, dirty and worn. There were also a few empty food wrappers and a plastic water bottle. Whoever had been there must have jumped off somewhere along the road before I stopped. They never found anyone, and I never got a clear answer about what the stains were. But the police told me there'd been reports in the area of people hitching rides under or inside trucks, trying to cross long distances. Some of them never made it far. After that night, I started checking every inch of my rig before every haul, even if it took an extra hour. I never drove past a rest stop without looking around twice. It's not the miles or the weather that scare me now. It's the thought that someone could be there the whole time, just a few feet behind me, hidden in the dark, waiting for a chance to climb on. Out there, on those long empty roads, you start to realize how thin the space really is between being alone and not being alone at all. I've been driving trucks for almost 2 decades now, and the road has a way of showing you things you can't ever forget. You spend enough nights alone on the highway, and you start to see how small the world can feel when it's just you, the dashboard lights, and the endless stretch of black asphalt ahead. I used to think nothing could shake me out here. I've driven through blizzards, watched tornadoes form in the distance, crossed mountain passes in pitch darkness, But what happened one summer night in Nevada stuck with me more than any of that. It wasn't about the weather or bad luck. It was something that could have happened to any driver who lets his guard down just once. It was early July, one of those nights when the air doesn't cool down even after the sun disappears. I was hauling frozen meat from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles, taking the long desert route to avoid heavy traffic near Vegas. It was past midnight when I hit the loneliest part of the drive. Highway 93, a long, quiet stretch that runs for hours through open desert. There are no towns for miles, just flat land and the distant outline of mountains that barely show under moonlight. The road was dead quiet. My headlights carved out a tunnel in the dark, and the hum of the tires was the only sound. I remember glancing at the clock, 12:47 a.m., and thinking how heavy my eyelids felt. I still had about 6 hours left on the road before I planned to stop. I took a few sips from a lukewarm energy drink, but it didn't do much. A few miles later, I saw something ahead on the shoulder. At first, it looked like a big piece of debris, maybe a blown tire or a sheet of metal. But as I got closer, I saw it was a car. A small silver sedan pulled halfway into the dirt, its hazard lights flashing weakly. I slowed down, instinctively scanning the scene. No other vehicles around, no sign of movement. I didn't plan to stop. Most truckers don't anymore. It's too risky. But as I passed, I noticed the driver's side door was wide open, swinging slightly in the hot wind. Something about it didn't sit right. I glanced in my mirror as I kept rolling. The car's interior light was on, but nobody was inside. I kept thinking about it for the next mile. Maybe the driver had gone to find cell service. Maybe they'd walked to a mile marker for help. But I hadn't passed anyone walking, and there were no exits or side roads out there, just desert. After another few minutes, I looked in the mirror again, half expecting to see headlights back there, but it was just darkness. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Out there, things disappear fast. I've seen wrecks get picked clean before anyone even calls them in. I told myself I'd report it at the next stop. I kept rolling for another 20 minutes before I started feeling like something was off inside my cab. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, but I had that feeling you get when someone's watching you. It's rare to feel that way when you're alone in a locked truck, but it came on strong. I checked my mirrors again, nothing but blackness. I even flipped the dome light on for a second, just to break the silence. My cab was the same as always. Coffee cup in the holder, logbook on the seat, cooler by my feet. But the feeling didn't go away. A few minutes later, I heard a soft sound. Came from behind me, near the sleeper compartment. It wasn't loud, just a faint rustling noise, like something shifting fabric. I froze for a second, both hands on the wheel. The road was straight and empty, so I turned my head slightly, listening hard. Nothing, just the hum of the tires again. I told myself it was probably something that had fallen over. A bag, maybe. I kept driving, but a couple of minutes later, the sound came again, this time clearer. It wasn't just a slide or shift. It was slow, deliberate movement. The sleeper compartment curtain was closed, the way I always kept it when I drove. My eyes stayed locked on that dark strip of fabric for what felt like a full minute. I didn't slow down. I didn't move. I just kept one hand tight on the wheel and the other ready to grab the flashlight near the seat. Eventually, I reached over without taking my eyes off the road and flicked the cab lights on. I turned just enough to look behind me. The curtain was still hanging straight. The noise had stopped. I drove another 10 miles before pulling over onto a wide shoulder. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I shut off the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and slowly reached back to pull open the curtain. The sleeper was dark and cramped, just like always. I shined the light around. Pillows, blanket, my duffel bag, a pair of boots. Nothing out of place. I even checked under the bed frame and around the cooler. Everything looked normal. I stood there for a while, just listening. The desert outside was silent, except for the faint whisper of wind and the ticking of my cooling engine. I climbed back into the seat, shut the door tight, and kept driving. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about that sound. An hour later, just as I was starting to relax again, I felt something hit the back of my seat. It wasn't hard, but enough to jolt me forward slightly, like someone had bumped it from behind. I slammed the brakes and pulled over instantly. The trailer rocked as I came to a stop. I didn't move at first. I just sat there staring at the windshield, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. My hands were shaking a little now. I turned on every interior light I had and climbed back toward the sleeper again. I looked under the blanket, under the mattress, behind the storage compartments. I even opened the small cabinet where I kept tools. Nothing. I stepped out of the cab after that, shining the flashlight along the sides of the truck. The desert air hit me hard. It was hot and dry, smelling faintly like dust and fuel. I walked the full length of the trailer, scanning the wheels, the axles, the undercarriage. Everything was quiet, but when I came around the back, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The latch on the trailer door was hanging loose. It wasn't open, but it wasn't fully locked either. The handle was half turned, like someone had tried to lift it and then stopped. I locked it tight, gave it a hard shake, and stepped back. The sound of that metal clanging echoed across the empty desert. For a moment, I just stood there in the silence, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dust. I got back in and kept driving until I reached a truck stop outside Alamo, Nevada. The parking lot lights felt like a relief after hours of darkness. I parked next to a row of other rigs and finally checked the back of the trailer with the bay lights on. Inside, the cargo looked fine, rows of stacked boxes sealed tight. But near the corner of the trailer, I noticed something strange. There was a torn section of insulation foam, just a few inches wide, as if someone had tried to pry into the wall. There were also faint footprints on the floor, bare ones. That was when I understood what had been happening. Someone must have climbed into the trailer back near that abandoned car on the road. Maybe they were hiding out, trying to hitch a ride, thinking it was empty or not locked properly. When I pulled over later, maybe they tried to get out. That explained the sounds, the bump, the latch being moved. I called the local sheriff's office at the stop and told them what happened. They checked the trailer in the morning. The footprints were still there, but there was no one inside anymore. They told me it wasn't unusual. People sometimes climbed into trucks out there, trying to cross the desert without being seen. Some made it, some didn't. I thought about that open car door again, those flashing hazards in the middle of nowhere. Whoever had been in that car had probably gone looking for another way out. And maybe they'd found it when I drove past. I finished that delivery, but I never took that route again. I added locks to my trailer latches and motion sensors inside the cargo space. I also started checking my rig top to bottom every time I stopped. I still think about that night sometimes, how long that person might have been back there, moving quietly just a few feet from where I sat. I'll never know if they jumped out somewhere before I stopped or if they'd been hiding there all the way until I parked at the truck stop. But what I do know is that out on those dark highways, it doesn't take much for something ordinary to turn into something that makes you never feel truly alone again. I've been driving trucks for about 15 years now. I've seen just about every kind of night this country can throw at you. Fog so thick you can't see your mirrors, endless snow that makes the highway vanish, and heat that feels like it's cooking the tires right off the rig. But there was one night that stuck with me. It was somewhere in Nevada, on one of those long desert stretches where the road looks like it's been forgotten by everyone except the truckers passing through. That night made me realize that loneliness on the road can be more dangerous than anything else. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer loaded with produce, heading west toward California. It was early fall, but in the desert, the nights drop cold fast. The company had me on a tight deadline, so I decided to push through most of the night before stopping at a rest area near the border. I remember how the sky looked that evening, pale orange fading to purple, the kind of sky that makes the desert look endless. Once the sun was gone, it was just darkness stretching in every direction. The road was straight and quiet, barely another set of headlights for miles. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the soft rattle of the trailer. I had the window cracked to keep myself awake, letting in the cold air. The smell of dry sage and dust blew in. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the dashboard clock, watching the minutes crawl by. It was past midnight when I first saw something strange. It was just a shape at first, a figure standing by the side of the road. I almost missed it. My headlights caught it at the last second. It looked like a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes. He wasn't waving for help or anything. He was just standing there, turned slightly toward the highway, staring as I passed. For a moment, I thought maybe he was broken down and waiting for someone to stop, but I didn't see a car anywhere, just him standing still in the middle of nowhere. I kept going, but it bothered me. I looked in my side mirror as I drove past, but he was already gone, swallowed by the dark. I told myself not to think too much of it. People wander the roads out there sometimes. Drifters, hitchhikers, lost travelers. You get used to seeing weird things when you drive long enough. Still, something about that man didn't sit right with me. The way he stood there, motionless, like he wasn't waiting for help at all. More like he was waiting for someone specific. An hour later, I needed to stretch my legs. I pulled off at a small rest area, just a single lot with a few lights and 2 vending machines that probably hadn't worked in years. I parked near the far edge and left the truck idling. The desert was silent, not even wind. I stepped out, stretched, and walked a few feet away, feeling the cool sand crunch under my boots. That's when I noticed something odd again. On the far side of the rest area, near the edge of the dirt lot, there were footprints. Deep, fresh ones, leading from the road to the rest area, then stopping just a few feet away from my truck. I crouched to look at them under the yellow light. They weren't from boots like mine. They looked more like worn sneakers, but the pattern was odd, like the soles were uneven, one dragging slightly. The desert dust around them was disturbed, as if someone had been pacing there, waiting. I felt my stomach tighten a bit. It was possible someone had been wandering through earlier, maybe looking for water or a ride. But I hadn't seen another vehicle there when I pulled in. I looked around the lot. Nothing. Just my truck, the vending machines, and the hum of the highway far away. I decided to get back in the cab. I locked the doors and sat for a while, listening to the idle rumble. I told myself I was overthinking. I've done this job too long not to know how your mind plays tricks on you when you're tired. I shut off the lights inside the cab and tried to get some rest in the sleeper berth. I must have dozed off for an hour, maybe less. When I woke up, something felt off. The air inside the cab was cold, colder than it should have been with the engine running. I sat up and looked toward the windshield. For a moment, I thought I saw movement outside, just a faint shape near the driver's side mirror. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes. It was too dark to see clearly, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. There had been someone there right by the side of the truck. I reached for the small flashlight I kept near the seat and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just the dry lot and the empty road stretching off into nothing. I shut the light off and sat still, listening. Nothing but the faint tick of the engine cooling. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever left those footprints was still around. I didn't sleep again after that. I waited until dawn started to show, pale and gray over the desert, then started the truck and got back on the road. I figured once the sun was up, I'd feel better. But the feeling stayed with me, like I was being watched. A few hours later, I stopped at a small fuel station off Highway 95 to refuel. As I walked around the truck, checking the tires, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the passenger side of the trailer, near the back doors, there were marks in the dust. Faint handprints, smudged, as if someone had been touching the side while it was parked. They were too high up to be from a kid, too clear to be old. It looked like someone had walked right up to the trailer and pressed their hands there. I checked the lock on the back doors, still sealed, still tight. No sign of tampering, but I couldn't ignore the prints. Someone had been close enough to touch the rig while I was sleeping inside. For the rest of that drive, I kept checking my mirrors, scanning the horizon. Every car that came up behind me, every shadow on the side of the road, I paid attention to it. The desert stretched out in all directions, and I realized how alone I really was out there. No backup, no one to call. Just me, a long stretch of empty road, and the possibility that someone was following my truck. By the time I reached the delivery point that evening, I was exhausted. I dropped the trailer at the warehouse, signed the papers, and headed to a motel for the night. I parked the truck under a streetlight and sat there for a while before going in. I looked around the lot, the empty road, the faint line of mountains in the distance. There was nothing, just silence again. That night, I lay in the motel bed thinking about those footprints, the man by the road, and those handprints on the trailer. It all could have been nothing. Coincidence. Maybe just travelers, maybe someone wandering for miles and stopping wherever there was light. But the thing that keeps me awake sometimes is knowing how many places there are out there where a person could vanish completely. Those long, empty roads where no one would find you for days. I still drive that route sometimes. Every time I pass that same stretch of desert, I look at the side of the road, half expecting to see someone standing there again. I never do, but I still check my mirrors more often than I need to. And I still lock the doors twice whenever I park for the night. Because out there, in the middle of nowhere, it's not ghosts or monsters you have to worry about. It's the people, the ones you don't see coming until they're already too close. I've been driving trucks for most of my adult life. The road feels more like home to me than any house ever did. I know the rhythm of it, the endless hum of the tires, the drone of the engine, the way the yellow lines slide under the headlights in a steady flow. There's a comfort in it, but also something strange about being out there alone for so long. Sometimes things happen on those dark stretches of highway that you can't explain easily. Not because they're supernatural, but because they're real, unsettling, and too ordinary to forget. This happened about 5 years ago, somewhere in Kansas. I was hauling a load of frozen meat across the state, running late after getting stuck behind a pileup on I-70 earlier that day. It was October, cold enough at night that the windows started to fog from the inside. The sky was pitch black, and there wasn't much traffic that night. Most of the route was farmland and long empty stretches, no lights, no houses, just miles of open country. It was about 2 in the morning when I started to get tired. The kind of tired where your eyes burn and your head starts to nod without realizing it. I'd been trying to push through because I wanted to hit Denver before sunrise, but it was getting harder to focus. Every time I blinked, it felt like I was gone for longer than a second. So I started looking for a place to pull off, somewhere quiet to rest for a bit. About 10 miles later, I spotted a small rest area sign. It wasn't a big one, just a pull-off lot with a few picnic tables and an old restroom building. I figured it was enough. When I rolled in, there was only one other vehicle. A small, beat-up pickup parked way at the back near the trees. No lights on, no movement. I pulled into a spot closer to the entrance, turned off the engine, and listened to the sudden quiet. It's strange how loud silence can feel after driving for hours. The air was cold when I stepped out. I could smell the damp soil and the faint scent of fuel from the truck. I stretched my legs, walked a few steps around the lot, and checked the trailer out of habit. Everything was fine. I decided to use the restroom before turning in. The building looked old, one of those concrete blocks with a flickering light above the door. When I went inside, the air was colder than outside. The light buzzed faintly, casting a weak yellow glow. The floor was wet from condensation, and there were footprints, muddy ones, leading from the door toward one of the stalls. They didn't look old. I assumed they were from someone in that pickup outside. Still, I remember feeling uneasy for no real reason. When I came back out, I looked toward the pickup again. It was still there, same spot, dark and quiet. I climbed back into my cab, locked the doors, and crawled into the sleeper. I kept the small window cracked open for air. The wind outside was soft, brushing against the truck now and then. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the refrigerator unit lull me towards sleep. I must have been out for about 30 minutes when something woke me. It wasn't a sound at first, it was a feeling, like the kind of awareness you get when you know someone's watching you. My eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dark. The first thing I noticed was that the air inside felt colder again, like it had when I was in the restroom. Then I heard it, faint movement outside the truck. It was a slow, dragging sound, like someone's boots scraping the gravel as they walked around the truck. I held still, listening closely. The steps moved from the passenger side to the back, then stopped. My heart started beating faster, and I could hear the blood in my ears. There was a soft clank, metal touching metal, maybe the trailer latch being brushed. I sat up quietly and reached for the small flashlight I kept near the bed. I didn't turn it on yet. I wanted to be sure I wasn't just hearing things. Then came another sound, the distinct thud of something being set down near the cab door. Slow, deliberate. I stayed still, breathing quietly, listening. The sound of movement circled the truck again. It wasn't rushed. It was steady, careful. Whoever it was didn't seem in a hurry. I leaned forward slightly, peeking out the small side window. The parking lot lights were dim, and from that angle I couldn't see much. Just the faint outline of the trees and the shadow of the pickup still parked in the back. I waited, maybe a full minute, before I finally flicked the flashlight on and shined it out the window. The beam caught nothing but dust. No one there. I turned it off again and sat in silence. My pulse was racing. I told myself it was probably some other driver stretching their legs, maybe checking their load like I had earlier. But that didn't explain why they'd walked all the way around my truck or set something down. After a few minutes, I worked up the nerve to check. I slid into the driver's seat, unlocked the door, and opened it slightly. The night air hit me hard. It was freezing. The lot was empty, no movement anywhere. But when I stepped down, I saw it immediately. There were fresh footprints in the gravel beside my truck. They weren't mine. I could tell from the size and pattern. They led from the back of the truck toward the driver's side door, stopped there, then turned back the way they came. Right near where they stopped, something was lying on the ground. It was a small metal fuel can, old and dented. It looked like the kind people use to carry extra diesel. There was a faint smell of gas in the air, which made me uneasy. I picked it up and it was half full. I looked around again, shining my light along the tree line, but the only thing moving was the grass swaying in the breeze. The pickup was still parked in the same spot, but now that I looked closer, it seemed different. The driver's door was open, just slightly, like someone had gotten out recently. I didn't see anyone nearby, though. The darkness beyond that spot was thick and empty. I put the can down and climbed back into my truck, locking the doors again. Every latch, every handle. I sat there for a long time, lights off, just watching the lot. Eventually, after about 15 minutes, I saw movement. From the edge of the trees, near where the pickup sat, a figure appeared. A man, I think. He moved slowly toward the pickup, carrying something. Maybe a bag or a tool. He didn't look toward me once. He just got into the truck, started it up, and pulled out. The sound of that engine faded down the road until it was gone. Then everything was quiet again. I sat there, still tense, waiting for any other sound. Nothing. When the sun started to rise, I finally got out to look around properly. The ground near my truck was covered in footprints, circling the trailer once, then stopping near the cab door where that gas can had been. The odd part was that the can was gone. I didn't take it, and I hadn't seen the man pick it up when he left. I checked the trailer carefully, locks, hinges, seal. Everything was fine. But when I walked around the back, I noticed something small on the bumper. A folded piece of paper tucked under the latch. It was damp from the night air. I unfolded it and saw nothing but a few smudged pencil lines, like someone had tried to write something but gave up halfway. It didn't make sense. I threw it away, got back in, and drove off. The rest of that trip went fine, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The footprints, the fuel can, the man near the trees, it all seemed too deliberate. I started to wonder if he'd been planning to siphon diesel or break into the trailer but changed his mind when he realized I was awake. Or maybe he'd been waiting for someone else entirely. Weeks later, I heard from another driver who'd stopped at that same rest area around the same time. He said there'd been reports of people finding jerry cans and tools left near parked trucks, almost like bait. Some thought it was a trick. Someone would come out when a driver stepped down to check, robbing them or worse. It made sense in a way. The road attracts all kinds of people. Some desperate, some dangerous, some just strange. Out there, miles from anyone, it doesn't take much for something ordinary to turn into something terrifying. I never stopped at that rest area again. Now, when I need to sleep, I make sure I find a place with cameras or other drivers around. I still drive through Kansas sometimes, and every time I pass that exit, I can picture that empty lot, the cold air, and the faint smell of fuel. That night reminded me that out on the highway, the scariest things aren't the things you imagine. It's the things that are real. The quiet footsteps outside your truck, the stranger standing just far enough away that you can't see their face, and the thought that if something did happen to you out there, nobody would know until morning.